Hello and welcome to the Savage Movie Night Podcast. We are back to continue talking about Urban Cowboy. I'm your possible arson and retaliation for losing a lawsuit burning down an iconic institution host, Adam. Joining me, as always, are my female character existing only to help the male protagonist on his journey, co-hosts Kristen. We're going to ask a group question this episode, so we'll take a second to introduce our other co-host first. And of course, it wouldn't be the Savage Movie Night Podcast without our embarrassing sequel that is the only movie directed by Sylvester Stallone that he didn't star in, co-host Rob. So guys, now that I have you here with your long, elaborate introductions that I know you love and don't get mad at me for writing whatsoever, what are your experiences with the country music genre?
So it's never really been my thing, the country music genre. And to be fair, a lot of my introduction to it was the modern country, which is kind of just like
Garth Brooks country, Shania Twain,
like
especially.
I don't want to upset country fans, but like it's, in my opinion, I think a lot of it is trash. Like it's the tractor going up on pulling up my cowboy boots, people in the Midwest pretending that they're Western. Like that's the vibe I get, at least from, around living in the Midwest. It's usually just like a pretty cringe genre. But when you look at some of the older classic country music artists, there are a couple that I at least can respect, and whatever, like a Dolly Parton's an icon. And Rascal Flatts, they're country music, right? Like I like some of their stuff back in the day. Yeah. So like there's a couple from like the older age, but this newer age is not it for me. But even honestly though, I say that, but I guess like this movie would be considered classic country, and it's not my vibe either. So overall,
we'll get into that, especially in the wrap up, because really this is kind of the watershed for classic country and the country you and I knew growing up. So Rob, how about you?
No, I have a lot of appreciation for country, especially the songwriting. And I see a lot of connection to some subgenres in Latin as well. But it's also not my thing. I understand some of the differences and some of the subgenres of country. So again, I respect it. It's not, I don't have the same reaction that Kristen has, but I do also remember that from a pop culture standpoint, it kind of feels like there was a lot more country happening, at least bleeding over to pop in this era that we're talking about, the early 80s.
Yeah, well, this is really what kicks off the sound Kristen and I knew growing up, which is more of that pop friendly, crossover appealing sound, so I grew up with a lot of I grew up in a very rural area, that was settled originally by people from Appalachia. So country and country culture was very big, but it was also very big across the whole U.S. in the 90s and early 2000s and the 80s, that it's hard to describe just how big acts like Garth Brooks and Shania Twain, and there are even some country artists whose names we don't recognize today so much, that outsold like Weezer's Blue album, so it was huge. You had things like, country line dancing fads, and, the Achy Breaky Heart, would break through and be a big cultural phenomenon and stuff. So it was all over. And I remember, again, like talking about like where I grew up, like I would go to the barber as a kid, and he would always have CMT on. And I never really liked a lot of the mainstream country. There would be like songs here and there from Garth or, Travis Tritt or someone like that I might like. But for the most part, I didn't like a lot of mainstream country, and I thought I didn't like country. But then I started to hear more some of the classic artists like Johnny Cash or Waylon Jennings, and some of the people, doing stuff outside of mainstream country that is still technically called that would still technically be classified as country, that I like a lot better. And these days you get some interesting stuff inside of mainstream country. I think like Noah Kahan might even technically be called country with his Dial Drunk song, which is really good. But or it might be more of like a folksy, bluegrassy. I don't know. Sometimes labels are pointless. But you get some stuff that's pretty good, with some of that hip hop influence, but then you get other stuff that feels almost like it's, like conservative love letters to the culture wars or something, where, that like there are a lot of times these days I hear a lot of the mainstream country when I'm just like in a store or something or in like a waiting room, and you actually like turn your brain on for a second and listen to the lyrics, and you just shake your head and like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm tired of this crap. I wish I could shut my ears off again.
I think in this era too, that because it was less media or mediums,
Yeah.
the country had more exposure to pop, like even on TV and stuff. So, this is why I definitely, why I know like a Kenny Rogers, for example, all that stuff I think is part of this, this surge in country that was happening in this era that we're talking about.
Well, and Kenny Rogers is interesting because he comes from some of that musical background. Like if you hear some of like the stuff he did, like with the Fifth Edition, because like Rob and Kristen, you both might not know, a particular Kenny Rogers song. Like you've seen, have either of you seen The Big Lebowski?
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite films.
Yep.
So you know the song, just dropped in to see what condition my condition is in.
Yeah, yeah.
That's Kenny Rogers.
Yeah, that's
wild. Kenny
wild.
Rogers in the Fifth Edition.
Yeah,
so,
but I mean, I remember Oak Ridge Boys with Elvira and all that stuff. Like it was bleeding over to regular pop, and it still had some of that older country flavor to it. At least from what I understand.
Yeah, but again, that was more the 70s, and that was part of this changeover in the 80s. So like I said, we'll talk more about it. And that's even kind of in my like literally some of my next words are we are going to learn why country music in the 80s sounded the way it did. So we're kind of jumping the gun here, but it's interesting. And some of it is also, especially for me, part of the reason I didn't like it is, you have for me, I have a tendency to rebel against things that were local. That local was boring and bland, and I'm not cool. So that's why I wasn't big into supporting the local teams or stuff like that. Like if it came from here locally, it couldn't be that big of a deal. And so, I think that also explains why, a lot of the people around me, were into country music. And so I wasn't, but yeah, no. So, so that's another reason this is an interesting exploration because, it makes it, it is a culture that is very familiar to me that I'm seeing on screen, but is also in many ways the start of that culture. With that out of the way, time to talk about what's on today's episode. And on today's episode, like I said, we are going to learn why country music in the 80s sounded the way it did, which hit film was inspired by an affair with Harold Ramis, and what this has to do with our Light of Day episode, because today we are talking even more about Urban Cowboy. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Jazzology with Willard Jenkins. Jazzology is a fun and challenging jazz trivia show where two contestants go head-to-head for a chance to win $100 and prove their jazz knowledge. Watch along and see if you know the answers. Want to prove you're a true jazzologist by appearing as a contestant on the show? Use the link in the description of any episode to sign up. New episodes air every other Friday on Savage Content's YouTube channel, youtube.com/savagecontent. And all past episodes are available under the Live tab. Thanks to Jazzology for sponsoring today's episode. And now, back to the show. For those of you that are just joining us for the first time, weird to drop into part 2 first, but okay, you do you. Here's a recap of the film so far. Bud is a young man from Spur, Texas, eager to leave the Dahl family farm for the excitement of the big city, Houston. He moves in with his uncle Bob, who helps him get a job at an oil refinery. After his arrival, Bob and his wife Corinne take Bud to the cool place to be, Gilley's. Gilley's? We had this discussion last time. Bud is entranced with everything about it and keeps coming back night after night. He meets a young woman named Sissy and sparks fly. They rush into marriage and move into a mobile home together. They also keep going to Gilley's nearly every night when a mechanical bull gets added and Bud becomes obsessed. Sissy is also obsessed and wants to try the bowl herself, but Bud forbids it, causing tension. More tension comes from Wes, the good-looking ex-con who comes in to run the mechanical bull and seems to have eyes for Sissy. Will Bud and Sissy be able to live happily ever after? Will Bud become a champion mechanical bull rider? Will Sissy prove that she is every bit as good as Bud on the bull herself? We'll have to find out. So that's the recap. Now Kristen can take us back into the plot.
I did look up the pronunciation yesterday, and I believe it is Gilley's. So sorry to anybody if we have been mispronouncing it, who has been listening. So now going into this, I'm going to pronounce it like Gilley's, but if we are still wrong, feel free to let us know in comments. Thank you very much. So as we covered in part 1, Sissy secretly spending time at Gilley's, where Wes teaches her how to ride the mechanical bull. She wants to impress Bud with her skills to prove that she can do it just as good as him. And it's in this part of the film that Sissy reveals they've only been married about a week. Meanwhile, at work, Bud almost falls from a great height off a scaffold. When Sissy returns home, Bud complains about how Sissy doesn't cook and clean like a traditional wife, but they briefly make up and go to Gilley's. And so it's at Gilley's that night that Sissy successfully does ride the bull, and Bud is angry that she defied him and was practicing on her own. So there's this point where they're riding the bull back and forth, trying to outdo each other, and Bud is determined to prove that he's the best. And during Bud's ride, one of his rides, Wes intentionally swings the bull around hard, which breaks Bud's arm. And so at home, Bud and Sissy are arguing about the fact that she rode the bull, yada, yada. And she claims that Bud is just jealous because she rides the bull better than him. And that's when Bud slaps Sissy and throws her out of their mobile home.
Yeah. And so with Bud complaining about the state of the trailer, it wasn't like he didn't even really see anything wrong with the state until his aunt, who'd helped bring him home after the accident, started making comments about how dirty, that there were dirty dishes everywhere and stuff. And then part of the fight after isn't just that she rode the bull, it's that she clearly been taking some lessons behind his back, and that's turns out where she was when he got hurt, and why she couldn't she wasn't home when he called.
And I gotta say, so you go ahead and you first.
I'm not defending anyone's actions, with violence towards women or anything like that. However, here's the tip: if your man gets his ass kicked, and you start working on mechanical bull riding with a guy who kicked your man's ass, that's not a good move. It's just not a good move.
Yeah, you can see how this would lead to trouble, and maybe.
And also, Bud is such an insecure little bitch anyway. So, anything is going to set this guy off.
It's just toxicity all around,
So that's what I want to talk about. How when they showed Bud falling, they kept doing this weird cut between Sissy riding the bull and him fighting for his life. And I was like, what are you trying to say here? What are we trying to be how dare her go and do something else with her life in her free time while he's struggling on the scaffolding?
No.
She can't plan that, dude. She cannot plan when he's going to almost die at his job. I understand what you're saying, Rob, about not being there when the call happens and everything. That's totally valid. But the way that they showed it in the film was super weird. It was this weird way of shaming her for just doing literally something else that she wanted to do. And I didn't like how it was edited at all.
No. I think that's the way that John Travolta's Bud was looking at it. but we know, but we are looking at her caught in the middle of the situation that she partly created by getting trained by Wes, or what's Wes's character's name? I'm sorry.
It's Wes.
But no,
Oh, it is Wes.
Wes is the character's name. It's Scott
My
Glenn is
bad.
the actor.
Yeah, my bad. But I think it's all that, like, and I think that some of the shots that you're seeing is a lot of how Sissy's just kind of trying to navigate these situations.
Yeah, because it's like I don't think she should be faulted at all for wanting to try to ride this bull thing. It's something that, they're both in this culture, they're both interested in it. And
remember, he was just embarrassed by that man at the diner.
Yeah.
So he is super insecure about that specific guy that she then goes behind his back, if you will, using that term, okay, to get trained by the antagonist. Like, that's a problem.
Yes, well, I can admit that it has some shady abilities, but you don't slap your wife no matter what.
No. Like I said, toxicity all around. We can acknowledge it wasn't smart for her to do the things she did, but it was also incredibly bad for him to be physical in the first place. It's immaturity of the age of the characters, but it's also, some of the cultural things and some of, what we might see, some of this also might play into character arcs.
And the fact that they're married for a week was crazy to learn. That they I couldn't believe that was only how long it had been. I was like, what?
Especially like with how like they portrayed, like I think there was a bit of a montage in there, and then with how the trailer looked, it looked like they'd been living that way for like at least a couple months. So
timeline's a little off, but yes. So kind of going in further into the story here. So Bud, he is unable to work because his arm is in a cast now, so he gets let go from his job. And he's looking at his wedding album, and the song Hearts Against the Wind is playing while he's doing that at this point in the film. And then Bud later sees Sissy at Gilley's, and he gives her a friendly smile, but she ignores him. Valid. Bud retaliates by dancing with Pam, the beautiful daughter of a rich oilman. Sissy dances with Wes in a sensual way to make him jealous too. And then Mickey Gilley's version of Stand By Me is the song playing while they dance. So this is kind of a setup for some bad vibes. Bud leaves with Pam, making sure that Sissy sees them. And Sissy is moved in with Wes by this point. She is like kind of staying in his rundown trailer behind Gilley's. And she also is trying to hook up with Wes to kind of retaliate, but she just can't bear to do it. Meanwhile, Bud is hooking up with Pam, no problem. So Sissy, because she can't bear to do it, she leaves the trailer. We hear Falling in Love for the Night by Charlie Daniels Band. And the next day, Pam visits Bud in his trailer, and he brings her to dinner with his family. So they're kind of doing their own things at this point in the plot.
Well, a couple of notes about Pam. Excuse me. First of all, I think that right off the bat, you learn that she knows she's the other woman, and she's cool with it. She's being used as jealousy, and because she asked him, "Are you just trying to get your wife jealous?" He's like, "Yeah," and she's down with it because she's just into cowboys, and she's doing her own thing. Cool. But what's kind of interesting too is that you'll start to see, and this happens throughout the film, there's this almost like it's almost like even though she's the what do you call it, the rebound chick, right?
Yeah,
she's almost more or she is more mature than Bud and Sissy. Like she's kind of like, it's kind of ironic that she's the one who's really controlling her own destiny and making her own decisions and not falling prey to being these dumb, immature things that you see Bud and Sissy, these games that they're playing, and they're just hurting each other. That's one aspect. The other thing is, real quick, the song that really stuck with me, and you see it reprised a few times, is by Bob Skaggs, called Look What You've Done to Me. Love that song. That's the song that's played when Pam invites Bud up to her place in a high-rise downtown or uptown, I should say, Houston, which is the other part of Houston that Bud's not really familiar with, right? This is the money side.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Pam is played by Madeline Smith, who I think she does a great job in this film.
Mm-hmm.
She was also in the movie 2010, The Year We Made Combat. The Year We Made Contact. And I'm pretty sure this was the first film that Madeline Smith was where we were exposed to Madeline Smith. Beyond the 2010, The Year We Made Contact film, she was also in the Space Odyssey, the 2001 Space Odyssey, and All of Me.
2010 was a sequel to that.
I'm getting them mixed up.
Yeah. No worries. I think she was in some movie with Chevy Chase, like Happy Farm or something like that.
Funny Farm, that's it. Funny Farm.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing ads for that on, like, we had a VHS, and that was like for something, and that was a preview I would see all the time.
Yeah, she did a little TV too. Prey TV, Rehearsal for Murder, Deadly Intentions, but she actually pretty much retired or was out of the scene in the early 90s.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, you see that a lot. I mean, sadly, it's more common for female actresses, for women, for various reasons. It's harder for them to get good roles as they get older, whether that's, even at a star level, but especially as, more of a character actress, guest appearance actress, and so, as the opportunities dry up, a lot of times they, start to focus on other things. But, we've even had other male leads. We talked about that. We've run into that with. The music is good. Very interesting. Mickey's version of Stand By Me is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's bad. It's just
it fits the vibe, at least.
Yeah, no, it fits the
Right.
vibe, and I think it's a good cover. It's just also an interesting choice, But yeah, no, Rob, a lot of what you were saying about Pam is definitely interesting, especially like she also seems to be written as a character where. One of her main goals is to land her a man. And it seems like, just about any man will do. Your man, her man, doesn't matter. One of the appeals of Bud was, in some ways, he was a man she could mold.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's for sure. This man is,
because
he's interesting.
Yeah, because she, clearly, jumping a little spoilers, as their relationship progresses, she starts to mold him, to buy him clothes and, spoil him. So that was interesting. I was also interested in, just like how quickly Bud's family accepted him marrying Sissy, they also accept the breakup super quick, and that he's now with this other woman.
Yeah, that hit me as something kind of strange, and I was thinking about that a little bit, and I think that I'm chalking it up to they were listening to Bud's side of the story, and Sissy can be labeled as the one that's shacking up with an ex-con, so maybe that's what's going on. However, I think it comes full circle, and now I'm jumping the gun, but there's something that Uncle Bob tells him later on that's really key that I think gets him thinking about just swallowing his pride. That was
that's why it's so kind of surprising that they're even okay with Pam at all. Maybe they're thinking of thinking of it just as like a in between person. Like maybe they know that like it's not going to last. They're kind of just letting Bud do his toxic dumb things, because he's just how old is he supposed to be? 20?
It's never really said.
Yeah.
But I mean, like Travolta's
he's
just
young
about 30. No, he's like 26 or so.
I'm not asking how old Travolta is. I'm talking about the character. I'm saying the character is young and dumb. I'm not saying Travolta is young and dumb.
I understand that. I was saying they don't specify how old his character was, and so I was just giving an estimate of how old Travolta was when the film was made, because that's the best we have to go off of.
Right.
It seems like a young 20s.
Yeah, definitely still developing a frontal lobe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we go into the next part of the film, it's when Bud decides he's going to compete in Gilley's upcoming mechanical bull riding contest that has a $5,000 prize. And meanwhile, Sissy is like, he sees the contest and he's there at Gilley's one night, and Sissy is trying to get his attention, and she's riding the bull in these like various sexual positions and getting the crowd riled up. And so Bud, Pam, and his aunt and uncle go to a different bar. And at this different bar, we do get another needle drop for the song Hello, Texas by Jimmy Buffett. And then next up, we kind of see Bud start to train for the competition with his uncle, who is a former rodeo champion, we come to learn. And Sissy stops by the mobile home to collect the rest of her belongings. And while there, she cleans it up and leaves Bud a note apologizing and hoping that they will get back together. But when Pam arrives at the mobile home and finds the note, she throws it away, which leads Bud to believe that she was the one who cleaned the mobile home herself. So as Bud tries to cut off his cast a little bit later in the film, he asks Pam to turn up the radio because it's his favorite song, which is Looking for Love. For those who have been watching part one and paying attention, that is the song he danced with Sissy to in the beginning, or whatever. That's like their song. So that night, Bud and Pam, they go out and they're dancing at Gilley's. I'm assuming, I don't remember, I didn't write it down, but there's some other good songs like what Rob just mentioned before, Look What You've Done to Me by Boss Skeggs, that I must be recurring. I think it plays multiple times. Kind of like how Looking for Love is the one with Sissy. This song seems to be the Pam one. And then later, as Bud trains, we hear Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys by Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson. And then one other thing before we discuss this section, there is one more moment where Bud sees Sissy and while he's driving and he waves, but she thinks he like stood her up, like that he never replied to that letter. So she flips him off and he's pissed. So that's kind of, this back and forth, this miscommunication.
Yeah. And there's Kristen's really downplaying one part, and I don't mean in a bad way. Just the back and forth that Bud and Sissy do to make each other jealous is insane. Like it would infuriate anybody. I just recently resaw this, so I was watching it and I was really paying attention to that part too. And to immediately start when she first dances with Wes, before she even starts dancing with him, as they're walking up to the dance floor and sees that, Bud is up there with Pam, she holds on to Wes's arm and gives like this little bite kiss on his shoulder. Right? Like this, and it leads to some more and more back and forth between the two couples of who can get each other more jealous.
Yeah. Well, and, it's interesting because, I hadn't noticed that you really do have the two love themes for, Bud and Sissy. You've got, Looking for Love, and, that the song itself speaks to their relationship, that in a lot of ways, they are looking for love in all the wrong places. And then, that Bud and Pam's relationship has that look at what you've done to me, and it's, that speaks to, what, Bud is basically saying to Sissy, when he's with Pam, is look at what you've done to me. You've made me end up in the arms of this other woman, right or wrong. Right. So that's again, like we talked about a lot in part one, how well written, how, regardless of how you feel about the material or, the characters, this is a very well crafted, well acted, everything about it technically is very good. And this is another example of that. That the attention to detail is there and done right. One of the other things, that really was kind of jarring to me, I actually had to look it up while watching the movie because, Hello, Texas started playing. I was like, huh, that's like some Jimmy Buffett sounding country musician. I wonder who it is. I wonder what the song is. I look it up, and it turns out it was actually Jimmy Buffett. I was not expecting Jimmy Buffett to show up in Urban Cowboy. Um, you
I
know,
missed that. Okay.
yeah. Well,
It was quite interesting trying to find the names of these songs because like to put these into the script, I had to just kind of cherry pick different lyrics that I heard during the scenes and try to Google it because I'm like, I don't know any of these songs. I'm not going to be able to pick them out. But that was how I was able to kind of find some of these is just I try to look for the most unique lyric in the song and like find it that way. But yeah, there's a lot of range with the different artists in this.
oh,
We did have an appearance by Charlie Daniels in the band, and
Yes.
one of the songs that they did was the classic. I don't even know the real name of it. The Devil, the Fiddler, or whatever.
The Devil Went Down to Georgia. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
coming
yeah.
up.
That's actually the full name. And that's what Charlie Daniels band is most known for. And then you also, and that's where this interesting. A lot of what was successful off the soundtrack, we'll talk later, was that, as we were having the conversation to, start the show, that kind of more poppy stuff. But, there is some representation of that more 70s, more of that outlaw style, like we said, with Willie, Waylon and, Willie. So.
Yeah, there's
Awesome.
one other thing that I don't think you were going to talk about it, Kristen, but there's a few moments in the film where you do get Travolta dancing as well, and there's a moment early on in the film where he's dancing with Sissy and another a friend of his starts dancing by himself. I don't know what that kind of dancing is called, but it's definitely a very country classic, unique way of dancing.
Yeah, well,
and
it's
then,
that kind of Texas two-step kind of thing.
okay, I don't know, but then John Travolta does it himself, and he does his own version of it, and it's kind of funny that you got to see Travolta dancing in every movie.
Yep, he's just a dancing boy, dancing man.
Dancing
So
bud.
so kind of the next part of the film shows a moment where Sissy arrives back at Wes's trailer and catches him with Marceline, who is a woman who works at Gilley's. And Wes says that he can't be expected to be faithful to any woman. And then an angry Sissy throws a carton of cigarettes at him and refuses to fix him a meal. In response, Wes physically abuses her. Meanwhile, with Bud, he tells Pam that he's trying to learn from his experience with Sissy and not be jealous. And so now comes this moment we were referencing a little bit earlier where Bob is urging Bud to reconcile with Sissy. He says, he's talking about how his formerly bad behavior nearly ruined his own marriage, and he doesn't want Bud to fall into that same bucket. And so shortly after that, unfortunately, we have this moment where Bob is killed in a refinery accident, which devastates Bud because this was like his role model. And then we kind of cut to the funeral, and Sissy does attend the funeral. And it's while there that she tells Bud that Wes was fired from Gilley's and that they plan to leave for Mexico after Wes wins the mechanical bull riding contest.
Yeah.
I think from this moment on, maybe it was even a little earlier than that, but from this moment on, definitely all of Pam's eye language is saying, I want to leave this guy and come back to you, Bud. And it's you see it happening when he goes back to Gilley's and he goes for the for the competition. You see it in many moments. You see it at the funeral. It was probably evident when they gave each other the bird. You just start to see the regret she has on her face, in her eyes. It's very clear.
Yeah. Well, and some of what Bud is saying, like when he talks to Pam, is not just he's trying to not be as, learn from Sissy and not be jealous. He's also trying to learn that, he was trying to make Sissy into what he thought a wife should be, and instead of accepting her for who she was. I think that's also kind of what he was saying. There is that he's trying to accept Pam for who she is and not, try and make her into, cooking and cleaning housewife or, this, that, or the other thing, but, accept her as she is.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, this is like a turning point for Bud in his journey a little bit. He's starting to realize that he can't just control the people he's with. Like, that's not love. That's not the way you're supposed to love.
And then with the death
Yeah.
with his uncle, and the last thing that his uncle talked about was telling him to put that shit down, put your pride away, and basically, you should reconsider Sissy. I mean, that's basically what he was saying. It's like, I know that Pam is hot, and all that stuff, but like, I almost, I made mistakes in my marriage and almost lost it, and thank God that I didn't, is what he was telling him. So I think he's, all this stuff is ruminating now.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things where even though like Wes is terrible, I don't necessarily want her to get back with Bud at this point either. Like, he's changing a little bit, but how I'm feeling is like everyone is garbage. Like everyone just needs to part ways and start afresh. But obviously Wes is the worst of the bunch just because, like, I don't know, he's just slimy. I don't like. I mean, obviously they're all terrible, but they were setting it up for this to happen.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there are points he literally looks slimy, like there's a film on him, as they get those abs to glisten, and you're like not in a cool, sexy way, but as in like ooh, I think that's like actual grease, like I don't want to touch that.
Right, like, you described him as good looking, and I'm like, is he? Like, to somebody, I'm sure, but he's
in like an 80, like so.
He's a tough guy, so all guys think that tough guys are just cool.
So he's got a very lean body, which especially for that period of time, he's more cut than you would traditionally see in a movie necessarily. But he's also, he's got what we would call a very rugged face, which some women do find handsome, but could be off-putting to others, but he's the very masculine kind of rugged man's man, Marlboro man, kind of face where again, he looks to a modern audience much older.
Yeah, I think that's something that happens a lot in these 80s movies is that the people that they just generally look older, like. And yeah, there's just, personally didn't do it for me, but you know what? It's fine. He did it for some people back then. That was the vibe in the 80s. So let's see. We are now to the contest finally. Well, we're just about there because after the death of Bob, Bud is thinking about skipping the contest. He's like, what's the point? I don't want to do this anymore. But his aunt talks to him and is like, convinces him to change his mind. Because she insists that Bob would have wanted him to go and do this contest anyway. He's been working so hard, yada, yada. And so at the contest is where we hear, as we mentioned earlier, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, performed by the Charlie Daniels Band, which, as Adam said, is one of their biggest hits. I'm guessing, I guess we'll talk about it in post, but I'm wondering if it's because of this film. We can talk about it in a sec. So the rodeo contest begins, and as more riders take their turn, the Charlie Daniels Band play Texas. And Wes and Bud both make it to the top 5 with Wes in the lead, but Bud pulls out the win during the final round by 1 point. And after he loses, Wes pulls Sissy away, and then Sissy tells him that she doesn't want to go with him to Mexico anymore, and he slaps her after revealing that. And Bud is getting his award, not reward. He is awarded the prize, and he's looking around for Sissy, and he's kind of disappointed that he doesn't see her. And then as the victory track is playing that we hear, there is Orange Blossom Special, which I didn't write the artist down, but I think also by Charlie Daniels Band, if I had to guess. So we kind of cut back to Sissy at this point, and she's in the car with Wes and waiting while he goes and sneaks into Gilley's main office to rob the prize money. She doesn't know he's doing that. She's just waiting for him. She's kind of feeling trapped, like she has to go. And so, it's while we see this moment of Bud looking for Sissy as soon as he wins that Pam realizes, okay, Bud clearly still loves her. Like what we have is nothing like what they have. And so she kind of admits at that point that it was Sissy who cleaned the mobile home and that it's Sissy that he should be with basically. And so she urges Bud to reconcile with Sissy. And so Bud goes and finds her in the parking lot. And then he says he loves her. He apologizes for being stubborn and for hitting her. They embrace. But after seeing Sissy's bruised face, a furious Bud goes after Wes. And so he goes in there, and a big fight ensues inside the bar, with Bud getting the upper hand this time. And Wes has a gun, and he tries to pull the gun out in this fist fight, but he does drop the gun, and the stolen prize money falls from his jacket. And then Wes is apprehended, and Bud and Sissy go home together. And then the movie ends with their song, the classic "Looking for Love." And that's the film. I know it sounds like so much happens in these paragraphs. I swear when I read them, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like condensing 40 minutes, 30 minutes into like 5 sentences. But yeah.
Yeah, no, because this is like the final act of the film, really because, part of the reason it's also a little easier to condense this last act is a lot of it. There is a lot of showing the competition itself, we're like, okay, we're going to see this rider here who we've never seen before. Okay, we're going to see this rider and this rider and this rider and this rider. Okay, and now we're on to the next round where this rider and this rider are facing off. And so that part does go on for a bit. And so like when we're recapping it, we don't need to necessarily go into the same depth. But
well, I think the best part is it didn't end with with Bud winning the competition. That there was more, and that's what made it a more realistic ending too.
Well, again, like we talked in part 1 about all the similarities between Urban Cowboy and Saturday Night Fever. So Urban Cowboy, Wes is kind of confident that his friends are, maybe that he's got the inside lead because of his friends being judges in the contest, not just being better than Bud, but like they'll throw it to him even if he's not. And so he's upset when, they say no, Bud clearly won. In contrast, Saturday Night Fever, I'm forgetting his character's name, but John Travolta's character wins the contest with his dance partner, but it's only because his friends were the judges, and they didn't. The other couple who was competing against them was Puerto Rican, and they didn't want to give it to Puerto Ricans, and so and this disgusts him, and so he actually gives the money to the other couple. He then but the movie again doesn't end there. Like it goes on. Like there's there's a situation where now that the dance, their dance partnership is ended, where his female lead had initially only entered into the partnership so long as they kept it platonic. He kind of tries to take advantage of her physically, and things end badly. Some other stuff happens, and his character kind of realizes the error of his ways and decides to leave his home and go live in the actual city, not just the boroughs, and get out of his neighborhood and change his life. And maybe he and apologizes to the woman and asks if they could be just friends. And so again, there's a good little bit after the competition, as things get wrapped up, that happens in both films. And here, it's also, that we had seen Sissy, had been assaulted by Wes after she threw the cigarettes at him, but we hadn't really seen how badly she had been assaulted, because up until now, there had been, obviously, we talked about, a lot of violence from Bud towards Sissy, and just a number of other incidents of male on female violence, and they had been kind of depicted as not that big of a deal, especially in the results. So this, Sissy with the bruises is the first time there's really big, like you see the results of, what physical abuse looks like.
It's a shame that it took her having these bruises for him to finally realize, like, hey, maybe that should not happen. Like, the bar is in hell, everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this specific subject, I mean, has been such a when we brought up this film as something to review, I made a comment to Kristen saying, "Oh, you're gonna like this." I didn't mean it from a you're gonna like the character as much as I knew that this subject matter was gonna in one aspect infuriate you, but I was really wanted to see what your thoughts were because it's a little bit more complex. And on top of that, I had this other thought in my mind about knowing how much my wife loves this film, but she also is much like you, Kristen. I mean, she would never she would I mean, she's not down with any kind of violence. She's pro feminism, all that. And why does she like this film when she would never want to be with that kind of character of a person? How can she, the duality of the two? I was trying to understand that. And I think that some of it is about the time that this movie came out. And yes, I know you hear that the phrase, that's how things were back then. It's not an excuse. I think it's just an understanding of like, there were only so many options. I think maybe, I don't know. It's something that could
And
get into.
I think also it depends on the time frame of when you're seeing these. Because when she had seen it at the time, sometimes you hold a soft spot for things, even if you know they're kind of problematic. There are plenty of rom-coms that I like from the 90s or 2000s that you go back and watch them and you're kind of just like, yeah, we're going to overlook that part, where
Yeah.
it's like, and that happens with everybody. Like, I'm not going to say that I'm some like perfect person that only watches the good stuff, but yeah, it's for coming from a modern lens and seeing this for the first time in 2024. There, a lot of it,
Yeah.
it just felt like it was like almost like watching a period piece, but like being forced to watch like 2 hours of just country boy bullshit where I just
Yeah.
I didn't connect because I was just like, all of these men are just like misogynistic and terrible. And then when they finally do get better, it's only because they had to go through like a bunch of hell to do it. And I'm glad that Bud by the end decides, and realizes, hey, I should not treat women that way. I need to change how I am. Like, that's great. Obviously,
Yeah.
good to have that kind of message. But it just still made me feel like I did not
Yeah,
have a
no, I
great time.
understand.
Yeah. And I had a lot of the same feelings. This was not one I would say I liked, despite appreciating all the technical craftsmanship around it. But I can also see that, this was for its day a progressive message, and it's that type of incremental progress that kind of helped get us to where we are today. But
Right.
it's still, you look back and go, that's some weak sauce there. Um, but it was still, especially, halfway into the movie, I was not even expecting that much of a message of, hey, maybe we shouldn't hit women by the end of it. I was expecting them to just be all for it and just depicting stuff as, that's how it is.
The funny thing is, I'm sorry, Adam. The funny thing is, if this movie had been done and there was no violence to women and no misogyny, I would have said there's something wrong with this film because it was sort of part of that.
It would be inaccurate, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's like I remember watching The Deer Hunter for the first time many years ago, and they show a lot of drunk driving, like long, loving shots of these people like barely being able to stand, getting into the car, and like to the point like where you're almost suspecting like they're doing method acting, where they're actually blitzed with how they're swerving and like sideswiping other cars. And they do this a couple times throughout the movie, and you're like, is this a commentary on? Oh no, they're just depicting life, because this is really before the anti-drunk driving movement. Like, they're not saying anything positive or negative about drunk driving. They're just showing how people lived before that movement was really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so I love the director Sergio Leone. He did Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, many others. many people consider one of his movies, Once Upon a Time in America, a classic. And I, have told people when I finally saw it, I didn't care for it. Someone said to me, how could you feel that way? I said, well, after the first rape, I was like, okay, it's by a bad guy. So you're just showing how bad he is by having him do that. Don't love, rape depictions in movies, but okay. The second one, it's by a good guy, and I'm going, okay, maybe you're talking about the complexity of, you can be good and still do bad things and blah, blah, blah. By the time the third rape happened, I'm just starting to suspect that Leone just liked rape, and I am no longer comfortable with this movie whatsoever. And so I can understand, even if it's a product of its time, there are certain times you go, this just turns me off.
You're very right about that. I did the same exact thing. I just saw Death Wish again, and then when I saw that one scene, I was like, oh, that's why I didn't like that movie this much. It just disturbs me.
Yeah, well, it's like Death Wish, just the whole premise these days really is uncomfortable.
Right.
But it's like I have like you talk about seeing things at the right point in time. I have a soft spot for Breakfast at Tiffany's. I love Audrey Hepburn and just about everything she does. She did. And I think it's a great romantic comedy. If you can get past Mickey Rooney in Yellowface playing the worst stereotype of a Japanese person
Yes.
you will ever see in the scenes, and his scenes
I choose
aren't
to forget
really...
that one. That one's in. Yeah, I forgot about that completely.
Right,
I watched it years ago.
Yeah, and it's easy as me as a cis white man to say, oh well, if you just get past that, because it. But I can also understand and fully accept if someone said, no, I cannot get past that, so,
wow.
And like I said to Rob, both with this and Saturday Night Fever, I could appreciate them so much on a technical level. I could not say I really liked them or would be a fan of the movies and watch them again, that they just don't really speak to me enough on a personal level where I, could really say I enjoyed them.
Yeah, I feel like I would say my closing thoughts about this would be that I can appreciate what it did for the genre of country music. Good. I'm glad that it, it helps the overall country music scene kind of revitalize. We're kind of jumping ahead a bit, but that I appreciate it for that. I just did not enjoy myself watching this 2+ hour film. I think that it could have been cut out an hour. If they cut out a half an hour, it probably would have still been the same story. I know that you said it wouldn't be authentic if they took out some of the abuse, so I acknowledge that. But if that was gone, it would be a shorter film, and then it would just be a country movie, and maybe I would just be oh, not my thing. But all of the other things just made it not enjoyable of a watch for me personally.
Yeah,
I think there's a great bad guy, in West. So that antagonist was awesome in this movie.
Yeah, but you have such a weak protagonist is the problem.
That is a problem, and I think, and the only thing with that is, well, I know definitely. I think what? I bet you if it wasn't Travolta and someone else playing it, I probably would have unliked the character more. It didn't bother me as much of more so than it was just someone who's really immature and needs to grow up, and that's part of this as well. But I thought it was it's a really good film, really good for that era. But I understand why you wouldn't want to see it again.
Yeah, no, I get it, and also just chiming in earlier, Kristen, you had mentioned, when did The Devil went down to Georgia? When did that really did that become a big thing from this movie? No, it had actually debuted and hit the charts the year before in 1979, peaking at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 that year. So it had been a big hit the year before, and that was part of the thing. The soundtrack not only had big songs like "Looking for Love" and "Stand by Me" that became classics and hit the charts because of this soundtrack, but it also then had songs that had already been hits previously.
It's good to have that mix.
Yeah. So That's the film and our thoughts, the most important thoughts there possibly could be. But how did the world of 1980 react to Urban Cowboys? In many ways, it was a massive hit and became a cultural phenomenon. The soundtrack went triple platinum with 5 top 10 country hits, some of which also crossed over to other charts. The fashion and dances and culture spread across the country. For many people, especially those born post-Urban Cowboy, as Christian and I were talking at the start of this part, this is the sound and fashion of country music that they grew up with. The 1970s had been dominated by the outlaw country sound associated with names like Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, and Willie Nelson. Thanks to the success of Urban Cowboy, the more pop influence, smoothed out sound with crossover potential became the dominant form of country music. The film was generally well received by critics, but was considered a box office disappointment, especially in comparison to Saturday Night Fever. It raked in nearly $47 million at the box office domestically alone, putting it at 13th for the year. For some of these older movies, it can be hard to find, like even on like Box Office Mojo, a lot of times they don't have an international gross. They just have the domestic total, which they took in something internationally, but it's a whole in the weeds thing. Anyway, director James Bridges would become a bit of a mentor to Debra Winger, working with her again on his next film, 1984's Mike's Murder. He would work with John Travolta and reporter and screenwriter Aaron Latham again on 1985's Perfect, which is in a similar vein to Urban Cowboy, where it's based on an article Aaron had written about a subculture, this time the booming fitness subculture of the 1980s, and also starred Jamie Lee Curtis. It failed at the box office. Bridges' last film was 1988's Bright Lights, Big City, starring Michael J. Fox. We mentioned this film in our Light of Day episode as one of a slightly more successful entry into dramatic parts from Michael J. Fox than Light of Day had been for him. Shortly after that film, Bridges was diagnosed with intestinal cancer and passed away in 1993 at the age of 57. In addition to Perfect with Bridges, Latham only wrote one more screenplay, The Program, in 1993 about college football. Fun film. He passed away in 2022 at the age of 78 from complications from Parkinson's. John Travolta continued to feel the pressure to shore up his fading star. He kept returning to what had worked in the past. In 1983, he starred in Staying Alive, a sequel to Saturday Night Fever, directed by Sylvester Stallone, the only movie he directed but didn't star in, and reteamed with Olivia Newton-John in Two of a Kind. Both were critically panned, but Staying Alive did succeed at the box office, making over $100 million. It was his last hit until Look Who's Talking in 1989, and he wouldn't fully make his comeback until 1994's Pulp Fiction. Now, for those of you who are always wondering what the answers to the questions I ask at the start of the show are, Look Who's Talking is the answer to what film was inspired by an affair with Harold Ramis, which if we ever do Look Who's Talking, because that has a good soundtrack, we will learn more about that. But Urban Cowboy shot Debra Winger to stardom, and she would follow it up with mega hits in 1982's An Officer and a Gentleman and 1983's Terms of Endearment. By the mid-90s, she took a step away from Hollywood to focus on raising her young children and would work sporadically in film and television again starting in the 2000s. Gilley's, the club that inspired the whole thing, closed in 1989 following a dispute between partners Michael Gilley and Sherwood Cryer. Gilley alleged that Cryer not properly maintained the facilities and stopped booking top-tier acts and sued to have his name removed from the club. Things got bitter, and the suit was eventually resolved in Gilley's favor, with him receiving $17 million and the club. A year after the club had been closed during the legal wrangling, and shortly after the judgment, the facility caught fire mysteriously, and the club burned to the ground. There was some talk that the fire may have been started by Cryer in retaliation for losing the case. This is allegedly and is written in Wikipedia. We cannot be sued for repeating that the claim exists. I am sure this disclaimer is legally binding. I've seen a lawyer on TV before. What do you guys think of the aftermath? I know that was a lot of information.
I feel kind of bad that Gilley's isn't there for fans because, I mean, you think of so many other big movies where people can go to the places and see some of the buildings. I mean, it's like, even though, I didn't enjoy the film, I can feel kind of sad that it's not standing anymore.
Did it get rebuilt? Was this an insurance thing?
But it'd be different.
I think it eventually came back. Let me look that up. Because
while you're looking that up, one thing that I when you kind of think about the movie, like Pam is the steal. I would have took off with Pam. She's loaded.
Yeah, no. I could understand that. Well, she's a more well-rounded person in many ways. She's more mature.
Right.
Debra Wringer definitely has her
she's
positives.
A sweetheart. I'm only playing. She's a sweetheart.
Yeah. Well, the original Gilley's location never reopened, from what I can see, according to Wikipedia, which is never ever wrong. But a version did reopen. Phil Ruffin, the owner of the Treasure Island Casino, opened Gilley's in December of '99 at the New Frontier Hotel and Casino. This is obviously all in Vegas. It was based on Gilley's. This is just me reading straight from Wikipedia. It closed again in 2007 when the New Frontier closed. Then a new version reopened in 2010 on the Strip at Treasure Island. So.
And yes, there's bull riding. I see it. I'm looking at it too, and I see bull riding there. The mechanical bull.
That kind of vibe fits Vegas, honestly.
Right.
Yeah. So if we ever do, if this show ever takes off enough that we actually have a budget, maybe one day we'll go out to Vegas and visit Gilley's, and ride the bull.
Maybe we will.
But. It was also interesting that, it has this big cultural impact. Like, it changes country music. It changes so much about country culture that being an urban cowboy becomes a thing. It becomes almost the dominant presentation of country, of fans who are fans of country music. But at the same time, it was a bit of a disappointment at the box office, nowhere near the level of Grease or Saturday Night Fever.
Do you have any idea internationally that had any impact at all? I think about things like, the fascination with the American cowboy culture, and even down to Japan's fascination with like Levi's jeans and stuff like that.
I kind of mentioned that after I said how much money it made domestically, that for older films especially, the places where you usually get box office numbers, it's hard to get reporting on international numbers, that you usually only get a domestic number for a lot of films. And so that just leaves it up in the air. Like, we know it wasn't zero because everywhere you look, you'll see, like, even on Wikipedia, it will just list, box office total is 47 million, or nearly 47 million. And that's just the domestic. And so, that's not the right total. You just can't find what the right total would be. Like I said, that's that way for a lot of these older films. So that was Urban Cowboy. Let us know what you think about it or anything else we talked about today. But that does it for us. Any final thoughts before we go to the outro?
Rob, I am waiting to see you in a cowboy outfit.
Oh, yeah.
So you're doing for Halloween this year. You're going to become Bud Davis.
I'm going to practice on the mechanical bull starting this weekend. Let's go.
You've got time. You've got months. You can do it. I believe in you.
Well, I talk about, you guys have heard me talk many, many times about growing up in, a rural area. One of probably the biggest things I pick up from that is, while I don't have one of those fancy belt buckles that I do usually try and have as big of a belt buckle as possible. I often select belts based on which one comes naturally with the biggest belt buckle.
Oh, wow.
Well, Rob, you never know when you're going to need to hit someone with it.
See, that's a wrestling fan right there. I've seen how many times.
No, that's coming up. That's from growing up where people would hit each other,
with belts.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I've been to a lot of rodeos and bullfights. One of the things that's amazing to me about checking out the rodeos is these professional riders. If you ever, it's not hard to check it out. There's one arm is tremendously bigger than the other arm. I mean, it's just insane to see the difference.
It's like professional arm wrestlers.
Yeah.
Which those are always funny. If you haven't Googled professional arm wrestler, look at one of them to see, do so you can see one of the most asymmetrical people you've ever seen. Now that we've moved to the big city and learned how to ride the bull and not hit women, we must look to our next movie. And for that, we have to put on our still suits, place some thumpers, and catch a ride on Shah Halud, because we are going to talk about Dune. No, not the one that just hit theaters earlier this year. No, not Dune Part 1 from 2021. No, we're going to go all the way back to 1984 to talk about the David Lynch version that is now considered a cult classic. And we'll see how it holds up. Dune is available on Max. You can rent and purchase it digitally from places like Apple, Amazon, and Google. You can even find it on Blu-ray or DVD if you're more into physical media. However you find it, check it out and then come back here and join us as we talk all about it. Thanks so much to my co-hosts, Rob and Kristen. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Javi, who, since you never hear him, we could be making up this whole time, and the entire Savage Content team. Thanks so much to our sponsor, Jazzology with Willard Jenkins. And most importantly, thanks to you for listening. If you like the show, give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell, all the good YouTube things. I've been your host, Adam. This is the Savage Movie Night Podcast, and we'll see you next time.